Oh yes, after that I got sick, and I had a suspected ulcer, so I had to go home to Ireland for 6 months. And when I was better, I decided I wanted to do nursing, so I applied to several hospitals and came back over to London to go for an interview to one, which I didn't go to because I decided you didn't get such a lot of money in those days, and I decided I'd have to be best living near some member of the family. So that's why I went to Scotland. I applied to one in Scotland and got it. I lived near my brother, which meant I got a bit more money for living out. I really and truly loved working on the surgical ward where they did all the operations rather than the medical one, which I didn't find quite as interesting.
How long were you there for?
4 years.
And after that?
After that I moved out to another hospital out in Dunbartonshire, out in the country. I liked that very well.
Why did you move on?
Why did I move on? I suppose I just wanted to change, and I didn't like living in Glasgow so much as I liked living out in the country, and by that time I had more money, so I didn't need to sort of, stay living at my brother's.
So when did you come to Southport?
So then I had a break and I went home. I just suppose got fed up with Scotland and I went home. And this time I went home for about 2 months, and I saw an ad in, local paper for nurses in St Anne's, and I applied and I got taken on there, and then I was there for 2 years, and then I came to Southport, to a nursing home in Southport, and I was there about 6 months when I was out one night and I met your dad. I was just walking along Lord Street and he came over and spoke to me.
What did you think when he came over?
Oh, I didn't think there was anything funny about it at all, because lots and lots of men had come and tried to speak to me, but I thought he was rather nicer, so I walked, or at least he walked home to the nursing home with me, and that was how we met.
And when did you decide to get married?
A year later.
And what was your mum and dad's thoughts on that?
Oh, Mum and Dad was quite pleased, because I'd already been engaged about 3 times and so they were hoping I would settle down.
And the wedding didn't take place in Southport, did it?
No, we went over and got married in Ballybay, which is my hometown.
What was that like for you?
That was very nice for me, yes, that was very nice. Otherwise, by that time my father had a heart condition, so he couldn't have travelled over to England. And it meant that both my father and mother could be there to see me married, which they always wanted to do.
Do you remember the day very well?
Oh, yes, I do, yes.
Tell me what happened exactly.
I can remember that my mother was screaming at me to get out of bed and get ready, and I was lying in bed reading a paper while everybody else was madly dashing about getting dressed. And finally I got up and I just did my own hair. I didn't have my hair set or anything for it, I just did my own hair and got dressed, and I was married at 9 o'clock in Ballybay. And we had breakfast at 10 in the local hotel, and then we had some drinks and drove to Monaghan and had our lunch at the Western Arms in Monaghan.
Was it a big event in Ballybay? Because don't all the people come out on the street?
Yes, it was a big event. Everybody was coming out and everybody was going around buying us drinks, and generally,
Did the cars come out and hoot the horns like they did? Or
no, they didn't do. They didn't do it in those days. No, they didn't. They hooted some, but not like as much as they do nowadays.
I suppose it must have been a big family.
Yes, there was quite a big family, and most of them were at my wedding. That's true. Yes.
So when you look back now on your life so far, is there any things you'd have changed?
No, I don't think it would have changed. I had a jolly good life, and I don't think it'd have changed anything. Perhaps when I was younger, I'd have liked to have a bit more money, but...
And do you think it's easier for people growing up nowadays than it was?
Oh no, I think it's much more difficult for them growing up. There's much more pressure put on them there's much more pressure put on you where you've got to have you must think of your career and have, want to get on and that sort of thing. So I think there's a lot of pressure put on young people. Also, there's a great difficulty, which there wasn't when I was young. If there wasn't much work, as far as I was concerned, there was always plenty. I could have always got a job or changed my job, which I did do whenever I felt like it. And as I said, we seem to have a lot more fun. I don't know, but that's what I think. We had a lot more fun than the young people have nowadays.
Fine, thank you very much, Ronald.
After being an errand boy in the co-op, at the age of 16 I progressed. I was behind the counter.
So what age were you when you left the co-op to join the Navy?
I was 18, 1942, the end of 42. And I joined the Navy at Warrington. Actually, I joined in the Fleet Air Arm. But consequently, after I'd had my medical, etc., they found I was colourblind, so I went as a stoker in the Navy. I volunteered at Rodney Street, Liverpool. It gave me probably the biggest outlook on life, which has stood me in good stead since the war. And it made me realise how I visited places in the world like South Africa, Ceylon, Australia, and I saw quite a different conception on life which I'd been used to. I was very fortunate, I was very lucky in the war. I never came across any action whatsoever. Even though I was in the thick of it, I never came across any action. We called in at Durban, South Africa, and we was even warned in those days if we was consorting with colours, as I even spoke to them, we'd be fined £5, and the Navy couldn't take the consequences. It was a constitution of South Africa that colours were segregated from the whites. It went against the grain with a lot of that we had to adhere to rules, and unfortunately it seems to exist today in South Africa. Calling in at Durban, South Africa, and probably other soldiers and airmen and naval personnel, I'll always remember there was a woman in white singing on the platform. She was supposed to have come to the docks on the arrival of every ship that called in South Africa, and she sang Land of Hope and Glory and all this, and she did like a contralto, marvellous voice, and I believe she was well known throughout this. But one of the most vivid memories to me was I was in a camp in Wentworth near Durban, and I was in this queue, and I trod on the chap's foot, and there was a chap from next door. Yes, it was in Trincomalee, and it was in the monsoon season, and I had the job on the motorboats. Every night when the officers went ashore, I had to go up to the main deck and down a gangway and down what they call a boom, and then you go down a rope ladder to the bottom where the motorboat was anchored, about 60 foot down. Well, this night I goes up the rope ladder, misses my grip, and it falls down under the motorboat. But being stunned, I thought I was under the main ship, and I couldn't get from underneath. And after a few moments, I really thought I'd had it. The next I knew, there was a chap saying, "It's all right, just relax." The lad on the gangway, who's a lookout, had seen me, and he thought I was just fooling about, but I couldn't swim a stroke now. I was demobbed from the Navy in 1946, and after my foreign service leave, I went back to the Cooperative Society, but I'd been unsettled for a few years. Times had changed, so I got a job on British Rail, and I was in various departments in Merseyside and Southport. I got married later in the 50s. I met my wife in Southport, and she was an Irish girl. This was in 1955. I met her through, it was summertime, and I'd been dominoing with the lads, and I followed her down Lord Street this night. I suppose I'd had a couple of drinks and that business, but she was very indignant and had nothing to do with me. But
why? What were you saying to her?
I was saying all sorts. You know, where was she? She was at a nursing home in Southport, and where she came from, she told me she came from Ballybay in Southern Ireland. I'd never heard of Ballybay. No, I had very little conception of the Irish in those days. Anyway, ultimately we got married in 1956 in Ballybay, because the wife had been off colour and slightly ill with rheumatic fever. and with a typical Irish marriage on September the 8th in 56. And nice sunny day it was, and all the family. We had a good wedding, plenty of whiskey flowing, and traditional Irish wedding.
You were an only child, weren't you? So it must have been quite surprised to be landed with a wife and all these.
Well, it was, but it had been broadened my outlook during the war, which was very good indeed. Else I might have been narrowing the outlook if the war hadn't arrived. I derived a lot out of the war, which has stood me in good stead in later life.
So how did you get on with the family?
I got on very well indeed. They were a nice family, bit reserved, but I got on okay with them, all of them, yeah.
So was the wedding quite sort of a shock to the senses, that being in Ireland rather than the one you'd imagine having in England?
Well, I was young. No, you took things in your stride. You're young now, and you know yourself. You take things in your stride. You accept things, don't you? Oh no, I quite enjoyed it. The only regret, my parents were aged; they never came. But they took to the wife too. They took to Kathleen. She came visiting my parents, and consequently they died, and that's in the past. But I did the right thing at the right time.
So looking back on it all, do you think there's many things, or even any things, that you'd change
in life? I suppose there is things that changed. I wouldn't be as irrational of being in life, jump out of one job into the other, looking at the other side of the street. But there again, I've survived. I'm here today, and luckily I'm in work. So who knows? It's on the cards what your future holds, I think.
What do you think your future holds?
A few more years to live, I hope. As long as I've never been one for looking for the moon. I suppose I've got a lot out of life because I've seen a lot of things which a lot of people today in the deprivation of today's society will never see. The war to me was more or less a godsend, and to some poor devils it wasn't, but I was just fortunate to survive the war.
Do you think it's better growing up today than it was when you were a lad?
Well, that could be a biased opinion on my side. I'm not prepared to quote that, because there's challenges today. There's got to be a challenge today to survive. But I enjoyed growing up in the 30s and 40s because times were hard then. But
there's a lot of similarities being passed now between the 80s and the 30s and late 20s depression. Do you notice that?
I suppose there is, yes. But in those days, the only comparison was you didn't know about it because you was too young to understand it, of course. You just took it for granted. There were a lot of families never worked in the 30s, and men got inadequate wages, conditions were bad. There was the means test with a lot of families because if they wanted social security, they really had to go through stringent measures by the authorities to prove it was necessary in that business. But I think on the whole, I enjoyed my growing up. But if I was young today, I suppose I'd do the same today.
Okay, thank you very much, Father. So what did you do after you left school at the age of 12?
I went to work in Wilson's looking after Mary, who was about 3 months old, and I used to take her out for walks, and generally my mother, of course, bathed her and did things like that, but I took her out for walks and generally looked after her.
What was Wilson's? Was it just a local family?
Yeah, just a local family.
Did you live in or still live at home?
I still lived at home because, of course, it was quite, beside that lake.
Which lake?
You know that lake? Oh yes, they lived beside a lake nearby where I lived.
So how long did you work at that? Did you get paid for that?
Oh yes, I did, but I don't seem to have got a lot of money. I should imagine I got about 5 shillings per week or something like that. I can't really remember, so long ago.
That was quite an early age to leave school. Was that fairly normal?
Oh no, that was because I was one of a large family, and my mother was glad,
money.
Yes, and of course the fact that I was there for all my meals and that sort of thing helped her, didn't it?
Yeah, that's true. So what did you do? How long did you do that?
I did that for 2 years.
And then?
And then I moved into town to Renane's, the shop in town.
What
in
sort of
Valley
shop?
Bay. Draper shop. Looked after their 3 youngest children. The others were away. The other 3 boys were away at university, so I looked after the 2 younger girls and the younger boy.
And how did you enjoy doing that?
I enjoyed that very much, because after that, I went to live in there, you see. I enjoyed the extra freedom of being allowed out till 11 o'clock, which was quite late, but you wasn't allowed that late at home. I had to be in about 9.
So when you were about that age, did you have any sort of ambitions or ideas what you wanted to do when you were older?
No, it's funny, I didn't seem to think about what I wanted to do. I just seemed to think I wanted to enjoy myself. There was a cinema to go to. When we went to the cinema, we went for walks and to dances out in the country houses and different things like that.
So how did you come to move to England?
When I was about 18, I moved to Dublin again. I met somebody in Ballybay and he wanted a nurse to look after his children, and I was always telling him I wanted to go and work in Dublin, so he took me to look after his 2, I think he had, and stayed there for about 4 years.
And how did you get training? Did you get any proper training in Ireland?
Well, except, that the mothers in the houses trained you what to do, that you never sort of went to a school for nannies or anything like that.
Compared with the wages that nurses get today, what were yours like?
Oh, we're ridiculously low. Ridiculously low.
So life in Dublin must have been very different from the little town of Ballybay. What sort of things did you notice that were so different?
I suppose the fact that there was lots of large buildings there. I think I noticed that first. Churches and cinemas, and when we went for a meal, we could go in large, the hotels were much bigger than any I'd ever been in before. I suppose that's sort of generally the sort of things. And there was lots of parks to go in. We went quite a lot in Phoenix Park and in Green Park.
What about the people? Were they different?
Oh no, they didn't appear to be any different. No, of course. There was quite a lot of country people in Dublin, so didn't sort of notice that there was a great deal of difference.
Did you go out a lot more in Dublin?
Oh yes, we did, of course. I made quite a lot of friends, and we went out, as I say again, we went to dances and went to the cinema, which seemed to be the main occupations in those days.
So how old were you when you moved to England?
I was 23.
And why did you move?
I moved because I really and truly wanted to go to America. And I thought if I got to England, I'd sort of be halfway there. And of course, when I came to England, and I met one girl who'd already been to America, and she wasn't all that impressed, so that rather put me off. I was friendly with that girl for quite a while. She came from Carlisle. She'd lived as I say, she'd lived in England. She'd lived in America for a few years and didn't like it, so that rather put me off. But that was my ambition, to come to England so I could go to America. I don't know why, but I always thought America was going to be a marvellous place to go to.
Did you find it hard to get a job when you first came to England?
Oh no, I got one quite easily, because you see, I was able to say I had experience looking after children, so I looked after 2 children in London for quite some time.
And what was the big differences you noticed between the English and the Irish? Or in the way that things are over here?
The difference in them. I can't really say now. I suppose young people are young people everywhere, the same everywhere, so I don't seem to. Was by the underground, I thought that was a marvellous way of being able to travel around. And again, there was lots of parks and lots of cinemas and theatre, and
So did you find that you went out a great deal?
I went out a great deal, yes.
Did you see any stars or anything like that?
Yes, I saw Anne Todd, and I think somebody called a star called Douglas Montgomery. I don't think it was Robert Montgomery, I think it was Douglas Montgomery, who was a Canadian. And I saw Vivian Leigh and Laurence Olivier.
All in person, you mean?
Yes, I saw them in person, and I went to see Pat. There was a dancer, singer and dancer called Pat Kirkwood. I went to the cinema. I went to the theatre to see her, and I saw the Crazy Gang. I went to see them.
What did you think of them?
Not the way we're crazy.
I'll take you home again, Kathleen, across the ocean wide and wide, to where...
You were born in Southport in 1924. What about your mother and father? Were they both from Southport?
As far as I can remember, my father came from Banks and was born in Banks, about 8 miles from Southport. My mother was the daughter of a railwayman, and she was born in Hall Street, Southport.
Have you got any special memories of your childhood?
Yes, there's some vivid memories of my childhood, yes, in the 30s mainly. I went to a church school up to the age of 11, that was called Birkdale St John's, and then I went to one called Farnborough Road for a year, and then I went to Birkdale Central School. Birkdale Central School run along the golf links where all the stars used to play in the 30s. Johnny Revolta, Sam Snead, Henry Cotton. I used to get their autographs, play tick from school and get their autographs. And I remember one day we got these autographs, Ray Harris and Johnny Irish and myself. Those were my friends. And the headmaster was in the study the next day. He said, "Where were you?" We said we'd just been sick off school, and our photos from the Daily Herald, and of course we had these photos of those 3 boys getting the autographs of the star, so consequently we got the stick over that. Discipline was pretty strict. If you was late, you used to get the stick in the morning, you know, a couple of minutes late, and I detested woodwork because I was no good at woodwork, and no names, no pack drill, but the woodwork master was known to throw wood at you if you was incompetent as I was at woodwork, and I am still to the present day.
What about your mother and father? Did they work?
My father, yes, he worked for the corporation. He was a wheelwright by trade. In the 20s he had his own business, but during the general strike and, you know, in the 20s, in the depression years, he lost his business, and he worked for the corporation, and he was a wheelwright. And his cousin Jack, he was the blacksmith, and they dealt with all, you know, everything in, because dustbins weren't drawn by cars. They were like big covered lorries with wooden wheels and that, and he used to repair these, and his brother used to put his cousin used to put the ironwork on them.
How has Southport town changed?
Well, Southport town has changed quite a lot, especially the areas like where we live now, Birkdale, Churchtown and Ainsdale. I mean, I used to go to the pictures, to the Bedford Cinema, which is, as you know, just up the road, about a mile away. Well, it was up the road, I'm sorry, it's not there now, it's closed down about 10 years ago. Mm-hmm. But there used to be hills on the sand hills, and on a Saturday afternoon you go in the Bedford for tuppence. All cowboy pictures and serials, you know, up along Cassidy, and the ladies strapped to the railway line, and you know, continued next week. And we'd rehearse all this on the sandhills afterwards, and that was 2p, which is equivalent to half a p these days. So you, consequently, in those days, you more or less, on today's standards, were getting the pictures for half a p. And of course, they used to sell ice cream at half times, and all the kids in the neighbourhood used to go on a Saturday afternoon. When I started work as an errand boy in the early 30s, no, the late 30s, about 1938, I was 14. I started as an errand boy at the cooperative stores We used to go all over Birkdale and Ainsdale on order bikes with 3 or 4 order lads, and get some house, perhaps a night, a horrible day, and just ring up to the manager. She wanted 2 eggs delivering, and you had to go with those 2 eggs in the pouring rain. Talk about the good old days. Some of them weren't too good. And of course, like, you had a big round. You used to go round to people's houses in the morning when you started work at 8:30, bring the orders in, and then they'd be made up in the shop, and you'd take them out on the push bike later in the day.
What were the working conditions like then? Did you have sort of unions?
Happy, I suppose there was a union, but I can't recollect that. Being 14 or 15, you weren't interested in unions, because I had a case like where I was put on the bacon slicer to slice bacon for a lady, and the first time I cut my wrist and nearly severed the main artery, and my mother was told to apply for compensation, but she never got it, because consequently I might have got compensation. I don't know what the matter was now. I was young myself. I probably would have lost my job, and even in the 30s there was a lot of unemployment. You was lucky to have a job. And at 16, I started work at 14. At 16, you went before the general manager and all this business. And if they weren't suited, they let you dispense with your services. But most boys were kept on because they did work hard, because they knew what circumstances were elsewhere.
Nowadays, young kids seem to spend most of the time watching telly, playing with videos, playing with computers. Yeah. When you were a lad, there was none of these around, was there? So what sort of things did you get up to?
Things that you could do. The name bands, Joe Loss, Henry Hall and Roy Fox, and all the Evan boys used to whistle the singing of the tunes in vogue, which now are called Top of the Pops, like the tunes like Jealousy and I'm a Polar and all those things. You could tell what was the vogue. Of course, there was no television. You'd just get it off the radio, which was called a wireless in those days. And the Erin lads would be whistling the latest tunes all around the various districts, like, so consequently you knew what was more or less Top of the Pops as depicted today.
And Southport had a bandstand, didn't it? Did you ever
Southport had a bandstand. Oh yes, it had a bandstand through the war years. And later on when I got mobbed out of the Navy, which was in for a few years after my apprenticeship, I joined the Navy when I was 17 and came out when I was 22, but that's beside the point. The bandstand was there. You go to the bandstand after the war, and great days up to the 50s and 60s, the bandstand had open their dance until 1 o'clock in the morning. Southport was the Mecca of the North and Blackpool in those days. After the war years, it really moved, really, as to say in present day mannerisms, groove. It was really great, it was.
So what other things did you get up to?
Well, in the 30s, when I was a boy, I used to buy a tuppenny book a week. You know, you get your spending money. I got 9 and 7 pence was my first wage. My mother would give me 1 and 7 pence and keep the 8 shillings. So, but you see, I didn't smoke. Some of the lads would have a crafty tuppenny packet of Woodbines, but it never bothered me smoking. Used to go to the pictures a couple of times, perhaps tuppence or threepence, you see. And I'd always get a tuppenny book called The Magnet, and the other one was called The Hotspur. Well, The Magnet was more or less a serious vein. It was like school stories about Bunter and Harry Wharton and the Famous Five. And the lad next door, he used to get his compatriot paper called The Gem, and we'd swap the Magnet and Gem. There was another lad over the road called Harry Keaveney, and he was he dealt with other books, and we used to swap the books around. You know, you buy tuppence, but you get, you know, all the lads would have to save money. And another thing, there was 5 books in those days called the Hotspur, the Wizard, the Rover, the Skipper, and the Adventure. Now these 5 books, I remember when I was about 14, just started, where they printed animal stamps, photos of animals in the books, perhaps 30 in each tuppenny book. And they said if you take these stamps out of the book, get as many as you could and send them up, and you get a cricket bat. So of course my mates weren't as keen as me. I used to go all around Birkdale swapping books and getting the animal stamps. And I sent 800 to D.H. Thompson's Fleet Street or whatever it was in those days. And I got a cricket bat. I could have had 2 cricket bats if I'd known, anybody over 400 and more, but you wasn't to know this. And it came this day, I was at work, Erlenland, it came, my mother said, and it was in an oblong, you know, container. She said the postman brought it in the mail van that morning, and I was thrilled, and they got it out, and it's a 3-springer with Walter Hammond on it. And Walter Hammond was the vogue. Used to go every night on the fields at Waterloo Road, which is not far from here, and we play cricket all the nights through summer, the lads, most of us, and you know, cricket through summer, outs and give us a warning into the dark streets, running around streets and all this business. What a great days, really. And another occupation I used to have, I used to go on the sandhills quite often and collect lizards. And many times the lizards were sand lizards, like, because Southport was prolific in habitation sand, and, you know, there's bags of sand hills in those days that's covered by buildings, etc. Now it's all more or less sand hills. And I used to have a little cabinet with rocks in, and these, and used to vegetate in there and bring the lizards in a brown paper bag. I remember they used to sell them in the pet shops even in those days for about 4p. So quite an expensive, and you get grubs to feed them on, and these lizards. And if you grab the tail had be left in your hand. And many times I let the lizards escape, mistake me by going, you know, dropping the brown paper bag on the way from the sand hills. Relatives, you go to their house and they come to your house. Well, the only relatives we had, more or less, was at Manchester and at Stoke. And the Stoke people used to come. We'd go to Stoke, and there'd be about 10, and they'd have had about 12. And one night when we went to Stoke, we went to a place called Stapleford, about 8 miles outside Stoke. The parents were obviously drinking. I always remember my father, he had a cloth cap, and the other fella had a cloth cap. And we had big boots as boys, and woolen socks and all this business. And they probably only had a couple of drinks, but because they weren't imbibers of much ale, because they couldn't afford it. But they were on the holidays, you see. We were on the holidays at Stoke in a friend's home. They used to come to Southport, vice versa. Well, on this night, we went to the pub, a nice summer's evening, and when we came out, the last bus had gone to, I think it was Utoxeter near Stoke it was turning out like. And so we had to walk, and we was going up the road, and a big limousine came up, it was a black limousine, I can remember that. And the chauffeur got out, there was a chap by the chauffeur, and the chauffeur says, where are you going, folks? And they said they'd missed the last bus to the Utoxeter from Stapleford. And, well, he said he was going that way, so he dropped them off. Though we all sat in the back. It was, you know, it was, I think, the first time my parents and the other fella had been in the car, a limousine and that. And we was, you know, kids was made up. He dropped us off at the door in North Street, Utoxeter. And then the chauffeur came out, he had a peak cap on the chauffeur and everything. And he said to my father and mother, he says, Mr. Joe Loss has had the pleasure of taking you home. My father said, Joe Loss, the man leader? He says, that's right. And Joe Loss come out and he shook hands with everybody and said, you had a nice holiday. And it's, you know, one of the reminiscences of my childhood. And Joe's going today, and he was a gentleman then, still is a gentleman, obviously.
Now coming up to Christmas 1984, tell me about what Christmases stick out in your mind when you were a child.
Well, say Christmas 1934.
Why?
It had bad recollections. Christmas 1934.
In what way?
I was 10.
Uh-huh.
And my cousin, my father's sister, and her family lived 2 doors away from us, where we're living now. We still live in Guildford Road. And my father's name, as you know, is Newsham, and they were the Christies. And the Christies and Newshams were related by my father and Mrs. Christie being brother and sister, and I had a cousin called Bob. And on December the 12th, it was Bob Christie's birthday. He was a year older than me. He was 11 on, you know, that day. And on December the 12th that year, my mother died. She cut her thumb about a fortnight beforehand, and gangrene set in, and she just died. Because there's no penicillin, so drugs were unheard of in those days. And then her mother, who lived with us, was Mrs. Pye. That was my grandmother. She was in hospital, and unbeknown to her, my mother had died, and then she died on Christmas Day. So it was a traumatic year for my father. So that was a bad Christmas. But the other Christmases before that were really the average kid in the street would probably get a drum at Christmas, oranges, apples, a toy boat, perhaps a pair of roller skates. Nothing ostentatious, because people was more or less not on the breadline, but even though people were working, money was tight, there were hard times. But you enjoyed Christmas. And I used to hang a pillow slip up at the bottom of the bed. Never saw my father come through. Obviously, his Father Christmas, as anyone knows. Great on Christmas morning. There was the presents in, a big box of crackers, probably worth about 4. But to me, it was the end of the world. Christmas was Christmas, and nuts, crackers, and and on the radio on Christmas Day, the Queen, there's no television, as I've stated before, gave a speech and all that. And everybody enjoyed Christmas.